Democracy has traveled from the east to the west in the shape of Christianity. And after a long struggle with the feudal instincts of the Germanic races, has returned to Asia, transformed and in a new body. But when Asia takes back democracy into herself, she will first transmute it in her own temperament and make it once more Asiatic. Christianity had Buddhism for its parent, says Sri Aurobindo. It was, in its origin, the Eastern ideal of spiritual perfection, of unity of all beings in the spirit, that was carried by Buddhism and other ancient disciplines to the coasts of Asia and Egypt, and from there poured by Christianity into Europe. The Buddhistic spirit of mercy, pity, love, of which Europe knew nothing till Christianity breathed it forth over the Mediterranean and with greater purity over Ireland. Mingled with the sense of the divinity in man, borrowed from India through the old Gnostics and Platonists. Christianity was an assertion of human equality in the spirit, a great assertion of the unity of the divine spirit in man, which did not seek to overthrow the established systems of government and society, but to inform them with the spirit of human brotherhood and unity. It was greatly hampered in this work by the fact that the European races were in a state of transition from the old Aryan civilization of Greece and Rome to one less advanced and enlightened. It was the barbaric flood that had submerged the old civilizations. The German nations were wedded to a military civilization which was wholly inconsistent with the ideals of Christianity. And the new religion in their hands became a thing quite unrecognizable to the Asiatic mind which had engendered it. And how strangely was the slight but sweet and gracious shadow of Buddhism distorted in the somber and cruel minds of those fierce Mediterranean races. Divine love, divine pity, the nature of the Buddha, that was the message which India sent to Europe through the lips of Jesus. And this is how the European mind interpreted divine love and divine pity, the fires of hell, aptly and piously anticipated on earth by the fires of Smithfield. The glowing splendors of the auto da fe, the unspeakable reek of agony that steams up through history from the dungeons of the Holy Office. But the Aryan spirit of the East, the spirit of Buddha, struggles forever with European barbarism. And surely in the end it shall conquer. Already Europe does homage to humanity with her lips and in the gateways of her mind. Perhaps someday she will do so with her heart also. Christ from his cross humanized Europe. It is indeed curious to note that the permanent, vital, universal effect of Buddhism and Christianity has been the force of their ethical, social, and practical ideals, and their influence even on the men and the ages which have rejected their religious and spiritual beliefs. In modern Europe, Christian only in name, humanitarianism is the translation into the ethical and social sphere, and the aspiration to liberty, equality, and fraternity, the translation into the social and political sphere of the spiritual truths of Christianity. The spirit of Christianity has translated itself in the social and political sphere into the ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity, which themselves have been trying to find expression in the outward form, in the mold of democracy. This parliamentary organization of freedom and self-styled democracy, characteristic of the bourgeois period of the cycle of European progress, as Aurobindo calls it. Once again, we have to make the distinction between the outward form and means of democracy and the inner spirit. The true idealist is not the servant of the letter or the form. It is the idea which he loves, and the spirit behind the idea which he serves. There are three ideas which are of supreme moment to human life and have become the watchwords of humanity. Three words have the power of remolding nations and governments: liberty, equality, and fraternity. There is a power in the idea, Aurobindo says, a force of which the idea is a shape. Again, behind the idea and force and word, there is what is called the spirit, a consciousness which generates the force. Mother says, there are forces at work all the time, which set people moving, which make them move. In the individual being, this is translated into exact intentions. But behind the intention, a force is acting, which is not individual. When the feudal system was broken in Europe by the rise of the middle class, the ideals of Christianity began to emerge once more to light. But this time, the Christian church had itself become feudalized, and a curious spectacle presents itself of Christian ideals, liberty, equality, fraternity, struggling to establish themselves by the destruction of the very institution which had been created to preserve Christianity, the church. By men who aggressively rejected the Christian religion and spiritual discipline, and by an age which, in its intellectual effort of emancipation, tried to get rid of Christianity as a creed. When the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity were declared at the time of the French Revolution, and mankind demanded that society should recognize them as the foundation of its structure, they were associated with a fierce revolt against the relics of feudalism and against the travesty of the Christian religion, which had become an integral part of that feudalism. This was the weakness of European democracy and the source of its failure. It took as its motive the rights of man and not the dharma of humanity. It appealed to the selfishness of the lower classes against the pride of the upper. It made hatred and internecine war the permanent allies of Christian ideals and wrought an inextricable confusion, which is the modern malady of Europe. The French Revolution had become the starting point of European democracy and colored the European mind. Now that democracy has returned to Asia, its cradle and home, it will be purged of its foreign elements and restored to its original purity. India, from ancient times, had received the gospel of Vedanta, which sought to establish the divine unity of man in spirit. But in order to secure an ordered society in which she could develop her spiritual insight and perfect her civilization, she had invented the system of castes, which, by corruptions and departures from caste ideals, came to be an obstacle to the fulfillment in society of the Vedantic ideal. The feudal spirit had taken possession of India, and the feudal spirit is wedded to inequality and the pride of caste. It is the nature of human institutions to degenerate, to lose their vitality and decay. And the first sign of decay is the loss of flexibility and oblivion of the essential spirit in which they were conceived. The spirit is permanent. The body changes. And a body which refuses to change must die. The spirit expresses itself in many ways, while itself remaining essentially the same. But the body must change to suit its changing environments if it wishes to live. There is no doubt that the institution of caste degenerated. Originally, a man's caste depended on his dharma, his spiritual, moral and practical duties. And his dharma depended on his temperament and inborn nature. A Brahmin, a priest, was a Brahmin not by mere birth, but because he discharged the duty of preserving the spiritual and intellectual elevation of the race. And he had to cultivate the spiritual temperament and acquire the spiritual training which could alone qualify him for the task. The institution of caste ceased to be determined by spiritual qualifications and is determined by the purely material tests of occupation and birth. It has become hereditary. So now, the son of a Brahmin is always a Brahmin in status, though he may have nothing of the typical Brahmin qualities or character. By this change, the institution of caste has set itself against the fundamental tendency of Hinduism, which is to insist on the spiritual and subordinate the material, and thus lost most of its meaning. The spirit of caste arrogance, exclusiveness and superiority came to dominate it instead of the spirit of duty. And the change weakened the nation and helped to reduce us to our present condition. This is also why the degradation and denationalization of India came into being. A painful but necessary work had to be done. Because the English nation were the fittest instrument for His purpose. God led them all over those thousands of miles of alien ocean and set them up in India to do His work. The spirit and ideals of India had come to be confined in a mold which, however beautiful, was too narrow and slender. When that happens, the mold has to be broken. And even the ideal lost for a while, in order to be recovered free of constraint and limitation. For the work of destruction, England was best fitted by her stubborn individuality and by that very commercialism and materialism which made her the antitype in temper and culture of the race she governed. She was chosen too for the unrivaled efficiency and skill with which she has organized an individualistic and materialistic democracy. We had to come to close quarters with that democratic organization, draw it into ourselves, and absorb the democratic spirit and methods so that we might rise beyond them. In order that hereafter we may build up something more suited to our past and to the future of humanity. We have to throw away the individualism and materialism and keep the democracy. We have to solve for the human race the problem of harmonizing and spiritualizing its impulses towards liberty, equality, and fraternity. Indeed, freedom, equality, brotherhood are three Godheads of the soul. They cannot be really achieved through the external machinery of society or by man so long as he lives only in the individual and the communal ego. When the ego claims liberty, it arrives at competitive individualism. And that is what we see in capitalist countries. When it asserts equality, it arrives first at strife, then at an attempt to ignore the variations of nature, and as the sole way of doing that successfully, it constructs an artificial and machine-made society, and that we see in communist and socialist nations. A society that pursues liberty as its ideal is unable to achieve equality. A society that aims at equality will be obliged to sacrifice liberty. Now, for the ego to speak of fraternity is for it to speak of something contrary to its nature. All that it knows is association for the pursuit of common egoistic ends. And the utmost that it can arrive at is a closer organization for the equal distribution of labor, production, consumption, and enjoyment. Yet is brotherhood the real key to the triple gospel of the idea of humanity. It's like a triangle. You have liberty on one side and equality on the other. And as long as you remain at the level of the ego, liberty and equality can never harmonize. They cancel each other. But if you rise in consciousness and you try to achieve brotherhood, real brotherhood, that's when liberty and equality become one. And that's how you can harmonize them. The union of liberty and equality can only be achieved by the power of human brotherhood, and it cannot be founded on anything else. But brotherhood exists only in the soul, and by the soul. It can exist by nothing else. It is the practical recognition of this truth. It is the awakening of the soul in man, and the attempt to get him to live from his soul and not from his ego, to which we must arrive. But can this alone be done? Sri Aurobindo came upon earth to teach this truth to men. He told them that man is only a transitional being, living in a mental consciousness, but with the possibility of acquiring a new consciousness, the truth consciousness, and capable of living a life perfectly harmonious, good and beautiful, happy and fully conscious. Mankind, says Sri Aurobindo, is of a less terrestrial mold than some would have him to be. He has an element of the divine that the practical politician ignores. This is why, Mother says, we are not here to do only a little better what the others do. We are here to do what the others cannot do because they do not have the idea that it can be done. India's mission is to point back humanity to the true source of human liberty, human equality, human brotherhood. When man is free in spirit, all of the freedom is at his command, for the free is the Lord who cannot be bound. When he is liberated from delusion, he perceives the divine equality of the world, which fulfills itself through love and justice, and this perception transfuses itself into the law of government and society. When he has perceived this divine equality, he is brother to the whole world, and in whatever position he is placed, he serves all men as his brothers, by the law of love, by the law of justice. When this perception becomes the basis of religion, of philosophy, of social speculation and political aspiration, then will liberty, equality, and fraternity take their place in the structure of society, and the Satya Yuga, the golden age, return. This is the Asiatic reading of democracy, which India must rediscover for herself before she can give it to the world. Our mission, says Sri Aurobindo, is to outdistance, lead and instruct Europe, not merely to imitate and learn from her. To recover Indian thought, Indian character, Indian perceptions, Indian energy, Indian greatness, and to solve the problems that perplex the world in an Indian spirit and from the Indian standpoint. This, in our view, is the mission of nationalism. Because in Europe and India alike, we seem to stand on the threshold of a vast revolution, political, social, and religious.
The collapse of society is rapidly accelerating. Global events are escalating at an alarming pace. We're now witnessing conflicts erupting all over the world. At the same time, global production is declining.
Whatever nation now is the first to solve the problems which are threatening to hammer governments, creeds, societies into pieces all the world over, will lead the world in the age that is coming. It is our ambition that India should be that nation. India has been obliged to admit many Western ideas, liberty, equality, democracy, and others, and to reconcile them with her Vedantic truth. But she has not been altogether at ease with them in the Western form, and she seeks about already in her thought to give to them an Indian which cannot fail to be a spiritualized turn. Spirituality is indeed the master key of the Indian mind. The sense of the infinite is native to it. India saw from the beginning that life cannot be rightly seen in the soul light, cannot be perfectly lived in the soul power of its externalities. She saw that the physical does not get its full sense until it stands in right relation to the supraphysical. She saw that the complexity of the universe could not be explained in the present terms of man or seen by his superficial sight, that there were other powers behind, other powers within man himself, of which he is normally unaware. She saw too that man has the power of exceeding himself, of becoming himself more entirely and profoundly than he is. She declared that he could become the Spirit, become a God, become one with God, become the ineffable Brahman. And she set forth immediately to find out the way. Indeed, says the mother, this transformation of the consciousness, this manifestation of a higher and truer consciousness is not only possible, but certain. It is the very aim of our existence, the purpose of life upon earth. It is the dharma of every man, the law of his being, the truth of his being. To be free in soul, bound to service not by compulsion, but by love. To be equal in spirit, apportioned his place in society by his capacity to serve society, not by the interested selfishness of others. To be in harmonious relations with his brother man, linked to them by mutual love and service, not by shackles of servitude or the relations of the exploiter and the exploited, the eater and the eaten. It has been said that democracy is based on the rights of men. It has been replied that it should rather take its stand on the duties of men. But both rights and duties are European ideas. Dharma is the Indian conception, in which rights and duties lose the artificial antagonism created by a view of the world which makes selfishness the root of action, and regain their deep and eternal unity. Dharma is the basis of democracy, which Asia must recognize, for in this lies the distinction between the soul of Asia and the soul of Europe, through Dharma. the Asiatic evolution fulfills itself. This is her secret. The Dharma is at once law of action and deepest law of our nature. Everything indeed has its Dharma, its law of life imposed on it by its nature. But for man, the Dharma is the conscious imposition of a rule of ideal living on all his members. The priest, artist, ruler, trader, craftsman, laborer, servant. Each has his type of nature, and there must be a rule for the perfection of that type. Each has his own proper function, and there must be a canon and ideal for the function. A lawless impulsion of desire and interest and propensity cannot be allowed to lead human conduct. There must be a governing and restraining and directing line, a guidance. There must be an ethic or a science, a restraint as well as a scope arising from the truth of the thing sought. The average Hindu is right in his conception of religion as Dharma, to live according to holy rule. But the holy rule is not a mass of fugitive and temporary customs, but this: to live for God in oneself and others, and not for oneself only. To make the whole life a sadhana, a spiritual discipline, the object of which is to realize the divine in the world by work, love, and knowledge. The fundamental position of Vedanta is I am He. Thou too art He. There is therefore no I and thou, but only He. God is my true self. God is the true self of my neighbor, Hari. If therefore Hari enjoys untold riches, it is I who am enjoying them. For Hari is myself, not my body in which I am imprisoned, or my desires by which my body is made miserable, but my true self, the real man, the real being within me, who is the witness and enjoyer of all this drama of the world. Once I experience this truth, I can take as much pleasure in the riches of Hari as if I myself were enjoying them. For I can thenceforth go out of my own self and so enter into the self of Hari, that his pleasure becomes my own. To do that, I have simply to break down the illusory barrier of associations which confines my sense of self to my own body, mind, and vitality. That this can be done is a common experience of humanity, to which the name of love is given. Human evolution rises through love and towards love. This truth is instinctively recognized by all the great religions. But love in the sense which religion attaches to the word, depends on the realization of oneself in others. If, as Christian theology says, the real man in me is different and separate from the real man in another, there can be no feeling of identity. A separate individual self will live its own life, pursue its own gratification or its own salvation. It can have no ground, no impulse to love another as itself, because it cannot feel that the other is itself. The mistake science has made, it borrows from Christianity. It is that action and emotion can be directed towards beings distinct from oneself. If science teaches men to regard themselves as distinct and purely corporeal beings, with no connection with others, except such as may be created by physical contact and the communication of the senses, it is obvious that the human will, under the obsession of disbelief, will inevitably shape its action and thought in accordance. And that spells in the end a colossal selfishness. An increasing sensuality, lust of power, riches, comfort, and dominion, a monstrous and egoistic brutality. If man believes himself to be an animal, he will act like an animal and exalt the animal impulse into his guide. The sense that this is I, and that is you, and that I must take this or that, or else you will take it, that is the basis of all selfishness. And so long as the difference between I and you exists, hatred cannot cease, covetousness cannot cease, war cannot cease, evil and sin cannot cease, and because sin cannot cease, sorrow and misery cannot cease. Paradise, says Aurobindo, cannot be made upon the basis of food and drink, upon the equal division of goods, or even upon the common possession of goods. For always, the mine and thine, the greed, the hate will return again, if not between this man and that man, yet between this community and that community. Christianity hopes to make men live together like brothers, a happy family, loving and helping each other. Perhaps it still hopes, though there is little in the state of the modern world to flatter its dreams. But still, it is the Christian ideal which dominates the best European thought. And the Christian ideal is the ideal of a united family. Surely it is a noble ideal, but it implies difference. Have you ever watched a big united family, a joint family, behind its outward show of strength and unity? What jarring, what dissensions, what petty malice and hatred! And then finally, one day, a crash, a war, a case, in the law courts, a separation forever. We may never have a paradise on earth, but if it is ever to come, it will come not when all mankind are as brothers, for brothers jar and hate as much and often more than mere friends or strangers, but when all mankind has realized that it is one self. The Vedanta provides, in the realization of a single self and the illusory character of all division, the only real explanation of this higher or spiritual love. Altruism in the light of this one profound revealing truth becomes natural because I am not really preferring another to myself, but my wider, truer self to my narrower, false self, God who is in all, to my single mind and body. It is inevitable because that is my way of evolution. As I have risen from the animal to the man, so must I rise from the man to the God. But the basis of Godhead is the realization of oneself in all things. The true aim and end of evolution is the wider and wider realization of the universal Brahman, the universal divine. Towards that goal, we progress. With whatever tardiness, with whatever lapses, yet inevitably, from the falsehood of matter to the truth of the spirit. We can accelerate this evolution by practicing the integral yoga of Aurobindo. And Auroville has been created for those who aspire to do just that. Auroville has been created for superhumanity, for those who want to surmount their ego and renounce all desire, to prepare themselves for receiving the supermind. They alone are true Aurovillians. For millennia, we have been developing outer means, outer instruments, outer techniques of living. And finally, those means and techniques are crushing us. The sign of the new humanity is a reversal in the standpoint and the understanding that inner knowledge and inner technique can change the world and master it without crushing it. Auroville is the place where this new way of living is being worked out. It is a center of accelerated evolution, where man must begin to change his world through the power of the inner spirit. At once, the key of the problem is shifted from without to within, from the visible externalities of social and political adjustment to the spiritual life and truth, which can alone provide its key. Why have I left politics? Writes Aurobindo to his younger brother. Because the politics of the country is not a genuine thing belonging to India. It is an importation from Europe and an imitation. At one time there was a need of it, but the time has come to stop the shadow from extending and to seize on the reality. We must get to the true soul of India, and in its image fashion all works. Mother once wrote, "Democracy was necessary and useful 100 years ago, but now we must go beyond it if we want to take a step forward towards a new creation. The Middle Ages, when the Christian idea was at its height, were an interregnum. It was a period during which the Western mind was trying to assimilate in its emotion and intelligence an Oriental ideal, but it never succeeded in firmly living it, and had eventually to throw it aside or keep it only for verbal homage. The present moment is in the same way, for Asia, an interregnum, dominated by an attempt to assimilate in its intellect and life, in spite of a rebellious soul and temperament, the Western outlook and its earthbound ideal. And it may be safely predicted that Asia too will not succeed in living out this alien law firmly or for a long time. Be very careful, writes Aurobindo to a friend, to follow my instructions in avoiding the old kind of politics. Spirituality is India's only politics. The fulfillment of the Sanatana Dharma. It's only Swaraj. It's only self-rule. I have no doubt we shall have to go through our parliamentary period in order to get rid of the notion of Western democracy by seeing in practice how helpless it is to make nations blessed. All that orgy of political oratory, democratic fervor, meetings, processions, passive resistance, all ending in bombs, revolvers, and coercion laws. It is only when this foolishness is done with that truth will have a chance. The Sattvic mind in India emerge, and a really strong spiritual movement begin as a prelude to India's regeneration. No doubt, there will be plenty of trouble and error still to face, but we shall have a chance of putting our feet on the right path. In all, I believe God to be guiding us, giving the necessary experiences, preparing the necessary conditions.